بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله العلي الكبير خلق الإنسان وحثهم على التفكير والصلاة والسلام على بشير ونذير ما بعد. Last time we covered Sahih Hadith, what a Sahih Hadith was, the conditions for a Sahih Hadith. Is brother Oli coming?
No.
Oh, okay, it's fine. Okay, and then we spoke about what the definition of a Sahih Hadith was. We explained the definition as well. There were 5 conditions for a Hadith to be authentic. Yeah, Hamza. He's the one, because usually it's the other brother. What are the 5 conditions for a Hadith to be counted as authentic?
Isnad is no break in the chain.
Hmm.
It's free from any defects.
Yeah, that's one. What does it mean by defect?
So, like, if there's like one of the people is known to be a liar or something like that.
Defect is more, it's a hidden defect, so it's quite difficult. Not known to be a liar, that's another point, which is another one. So you said 3 now. So they're not a liar, so they've got good upstanding in the community. Adala.
What was accuracy?
Accuracy.
And
How like they're really, the intelligence basically, they don't have sort of these neurological disorder where they forget things. Can't remember. Okay, so you said the first one, which was ittisalu sanad, so there's a continuous chain, there's no breakage in the chain. The second one was dhabt al-ruwat, which is the precision of the people narrating the chain of hadith. And then you have the adam al-shudud, so there is no rarity in the chain, which is basically this hadith doesn't contradict a hadith which is more authentic than this. And adam al-illa, and it doesn't have this thing called an illa, which we said it's quite nuanced, and I can remember in the diagram, we didn't get it out today because it's quite difficult to set up and stuff, but illa is something which is basically 2 people might have the same name. One of them might be weak, one of them might be authentic. So how do we tell the difference? If they have the same, because the narrators who have the same name, they're from the same place, they have the same father's name, they have the same granddad's name, but in the great granddad, they differ there. So like even Imam Bukhari, inshallah we're going to talk a bit about his life today. There's another scholar, hadith scholar, who has the same name as him, Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim, but his name is Ibn al-Mughira, that's his great grandfather's name, Mughira. And the other scholar is Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim, and his grandfather's name is Muqsim or Muqassim. So these are scholars with the same hadith, the same name. One of them might be a different person than the other. So this is why you have to know exactly who you're talking about. And then we mentioned an example of Sahih Hadith, what it was. We mentioned about the ruling when it comes to a Sahih Hadith, what the ruling is. And there's a thing here about when a hadith is found to be authentic, then this is my madhab. Remember, this is a famous saying that people say, that when a hadith is found to be sahih, then this is my madhab, this is my way. This is attributed to all the 4 imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, in different wording albeit, but similar statements, Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, that when a hadith is found to be authentic, then this is my way. This is, take what I say, throw against the wall, and act upon the hadith. But what is actually meant by that? This is what is said really out of context, that when was this said? Who was it said to? Right? إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي. This is a statement that is really generalized, that people say every single day, oh look, this hadith is in Sahih al-Bukhari, it's really authentic. Are you not going to act upon it? Because the Imam said, are you going to take what the Imams who interpreted the hadith said over the actual text of the hadith? So it puts people in a very difficult situation, because you think, on one hand, these people understood the Quran and hadith better than we did. But at the same time, if they've said that you take the authentic hadith, then by you following the authentic hadith, you are following them. It sort of makes kind of logical sense. But the reason why it's flawed is we have to understand every single statement in context. Because if you take things out of context, even though they might seem apparently they mean this particular thing, in the context they were said in, might mean something completely different. So this particular statement, and I'm going to talk about when Imam Shafi'i himself said it. So Imam Shafi'i, Muhammad ibn Idris, he was a famous scholar of hadith as well as fiqh. His school of thought is followed all across the world. So Imam Shafi'i, his teacher was another Imam of fiqh, which was Imam of Dar al-Hijrah, Imam Malik. So Imam Malik, from his methodology, is quite complex. There was a diagram in the presentation, maybe next week we'll put it on. Imam Malik, his methodology is that if his teachers, because he lived where? Imam Malik, you know where he lived? Medina. Yeah, he was known as the Imam of Dar al-Hijrah, the Imam of the place of Hijrah. So he lived in Medina. So he was a tabi. So who was his teachers? The Sahaba. And so he was actually, a lot of his teachers were tabi'i, and he heard from Sahaba as well. So a lot of his sort of teachers, they were those who studied from the companions, who stood from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly. So obviously the way they lived their life will be according to the Sunnah, and they would, whatever they would put into practice. So now you have this notion of amalu ahlil Medina. So the practice, or the communal practice of the people of Medina, and they call it Sunnah of Ahlul Medina. So he called it the consensus, the ijma of Ahlul Medina, that if every scholar of Medina agreed on something, then they wouldn't go against their teachers who were the companions, and they wouldn't go against what the Prophet ﷺ said. So based on that, Imam Malik's methodology is that if a hadith, even though it reaches him with an authentic chain, because last week we discussed that even if a hadith is found with an authentic chain, we're only talking about probabilities. It could be that the hadith narrator heard wrong, but it's still according to the letter of the book, according to the letter of the law, according to the hadith transmission science, it's an authentic hadith, but it could be that the narrator heard wrong. So how do we ratify this, and how do you understand this? So Imam Malik, one of his ways of understanding it is that if a hadith came which was authentic to him, if it reached him with an authentic chain, but he found that the practice of the scholars of Medina was against this, he would reject the hadith and act upon the amal of the Ahl al-Medina, the things that the practice that the people of Medina are upon. And why? What are the reasons that he would do this? Can you think of any reasons why he would do this? Why would he prefer acting upon the scholars rather than the hadith? I mentioned one already.
Well,
they studied with the Prophet ﷺ. So even though, because the grading is just kind of a probability. So obviously remember when we talked about mutawatir, we said that's a definite, like qat'i. It's definitively that's authentic, right? There is not a shadow of a doubt that this is there's some error in transmission. But with the Sahih Hadith, it's an authentic hadith, but it could be, because when we find a Sahih Hadith, it goes against the principle that's mentioned in the Quran, then obviously we would take the Quran over that. But there's a way you understand the hadith in the light of the Quran, not the other way around. So Imam Malik, the reasons why he would do that, first of all, is because he understood that the people who are narrating this hadith, if they weren't acting upon it themselves, then there should be reasons for that. The reasons could be that was a specific situation, this hadith, and I mentioned an example a few weeks ago about the man came and he kissed his wife, and the Prophet ﷺ said his fast is broken, and the second man came and did the exact same thing and he said it's not broken. And Abu Hurairah only knew because the first man was old, first man was young, second man was old, right? Abu Hurairah knew because he was there. But the people who are transmitting that, they would transmit it as a general ruling. Right? So it's understanding the general from the specific. That could be a reason why a hadith narrator didn't act upon a certain hadith. A second reason could be that this ruling was for a particular time. So like remember we mentioned some examples. Can you remember about in the beginning it was allowed in Islam, but later on alcohol,
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then returning salam during prayers.
That's one thing as well, but there's a disagreement on that. People say that this was carried on. Some scholars of fiqh said that's still okay to do that. But as well, talking during the prayer, you're allowed to like generally talk during the prayer in the beginning of Islam, and then there was a certain point where you can't talk. you're allowed to drink alcohol in the beginning when Islam, in the inception of Islam, and then after that, the ruling changed. Right? So things like that, that's called an abrogation. It's called, this ruling became mansukh, it changed. So it could be that the ruling changed, but the hadith was still, the Prophet ﷺ said it, so it's still a hadith, right? But the person who's narrating it, they understood that the ruling changed. That's why they don't act upon it themselves. And this is famous regarding the hadith of raising the hands before and after ruku. That some hadith scholars are of the opinion that the person who narrated this hadith didn't act upon it himself, Ibn Umar. So there's narrations where he didn't act upon it himself, but obviously that's a big debate.
So Imam Bukhari, Imam Bukhari had written a big book,
Yeah.
entire book about this one.
Yeah, Imam Bukhari wrote an entire book, Juz Raf'a Yadayn, which was basically a book just on the hadith of raising the hands before and after prayer. But the thing is, with hadith scholars, when they, for example, if I'm on a particular way, I would write hadith not according to my agenda, but I would, because I am convinced that this is the way to go, right? I would only include them hadith, right? And I would critique any other hadith that was against this, right? But the other scholars who were not of this opinion, they would do the same. So it's really important that we have a balanced argument when you look at this. And this is actually one of the things, inshallah, in a few weeks, maybe, in a few weeks after we covered all the Mustalah al-Hadith, we'll have some applied, so an application on analyzing the different chains of Hadith and coming to a tentative conclusion on the different narrations and why these scholars say this and why this scholar say this. Because it's really important that we don't just look at one side of the story. We should look at the both sides of the story from their own mouth. So for example, if you're taking a scholar who's of a certain opinion, right, you shouldn't take, okay, the other side say this. You shouldn't take it from him. You should take it from the other side, because they will give you their correct argument rather than him sort of giving you the other side's argument. So this is really important to take into consideration. But they say regarding this, again regarding the witr, they say about Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala, who he narrated that the Prophet ﷺ prayed the Salatul Witr on a camel, and you can only and then he himself, it's narrated that someone saw him when he was praying the witr, he got off the camel and he prayed witr. But why do that, right? So this is an example of you going against what you narrate for reasons, because salah and camels I didn't clarify. So when you pray salah, right, you're allowed to pray nafil salah in a vehicle. Generally in a camel they would pray because the camel can go in any direction.
The qibla need not be pointing to the qibla.
Yeah.
It's a sunnah prayer.
Yeah, if it's a sunnah prayer or not a fard. But for a fard, they would get off the camel and they would pray. Obviously, even in times of like war and stuff like that, you're still allowed to pray on. So there's dispensation. When you're in certain situations, then you can go in anywhere, and then فَإِنَّمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ, wherever you face, then there is Allah. But then comes the question, where is Allah? That's the more of a aqeedah question.
So, you know that, and in the sky, that's what a lot of people say, Allah is everywhere.
This is a really interesting discussion. Yeah, go on, brother.
So, praying, if you're traveling in a train or plane or coach, you got to do fard salah. So, you got to do it in your seat, right?
Obviously
in whichever direction.
Yeah, of course. So in certain, for example, situations you can't control. So in Islam, you always have a general ruling, right? General rulings. And then specific rulings based on your situation, this is what people find difficult to understand. They think Islam is very rigid in its framework that, oh no, you have to do this, otherwise you're going to go to hell. No, in certain situations, the rulings can change, and some people are very shocked by this, right? They think that, oh, how can Islam allow for this? And this is why the scholars have spent years and years understanding the Quran and Hadith and extracting these rulings, finding the way out for people. Right, Imam Sufyan al-Thawri, who was also a famous scholar of Hadith, also we mentioned his name a few times. He said that the whole point of fiqh, إِنَّمَا الْفِقْهُ طَلَبُ الرُّخْصَةِ, that the whole point of fiqh is to find that dispensation, to find the way out. This is the whole point, that the scholars study the fiqh to see what's appropriate for different situations. And he says the reason why for this, فَأَمَّا الشَّدَائِدْ فَيُحْسِنُهُ كُلُّ أَحَدٍ. As for the general ruling, or they say the harsh ruling, but it means the general ruling, then anyone can just say it because it's written in the books. But the whole point of a faqih, a person who is a scholar of hadith, a scholar of fiqh, of understanding, is that they know how to apply in different contexts. Regarding the where is Allah thing, so obviously that's a very long discussion, and what I think with questions with this is everyone is right, because the whole premise is you're not confining Allah to a space. No one, if you're confining Allah to a space, no one says that. Even the people who of the opinion that Allah is in the above direction, like Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, etc., his student Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, and many modern people as well, they say Allah is in the above direction, about the seven. And there's hadith, for example, in the hadith, it says that you will see Allah, in the Sahih al-Bukhari, on the Day of Judgment. Yeah, you will see Allah kama tarawna al-qamar laylat al-badr, just as you see the moon on the night of Badr, because on the night, Badr is the 14th night of the month. So on the 14th night of the month, you have a full moon, right? So then, and then in the hadith it says that there will be so many people, right? Their backs will be against their backs, but then none of these will obstruct the view. So then you understand, of course, it wouldn't that be in the above direction. So this is kind of, but then again, you're saying that, but then are you ascribing a direction to Allah that He didn't ascribe for Himself? But then the hadith, this is what you understand from it, logically. Innit? So this is a very long discussion, but just a summary of it, I think both of the groups, I don't think no one says Allah is everywhere. For example, the group people who say that, the scholars who say that Allah is in the summa stawa ila sama, that He's in the sama, right? They don't say that. They say regarding the people who say Allah is everywhere that, oh look, Allah is in my bag, Allah is in not really, no one really says that. They say Allah's hearing and His vision is everywhere. Allah is vigilant over everywhere, but He doesn't occupy that space, because Allah cannot be in His creation. And then some other scholars are of the opinion that Allah is munfasil an khalqihi, that He is sort of outside His creation. But then if He's outside His creation, aren't you putting a space onto Him? Or like He's somewhere. And then other scholars say no, a safer way of saying it is Allah is Allah, say mawjudun bila makan. Allah is present but without a space. So by you saying that, you're basically agreeing with everyone, because then it's a safe way of saying the way out. So you're not saying Allah is physically everywhere, because then you're saying Allah is a presence, and it's very difficult. And one of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, who is something attributed to him, that he said that وَالْعَجْزُ عَنْ إِدْرَاكِهِ إِدْرَاكُ وَالْبَحْثُ عَنْ ذَاتِهِ كُفْرٌ وَإِشْرَاكُ. That he said that to be limited in understanding Allah and His essence is actually you understanding Him. By you understanding, you're not going to understand Him. And delving into the matters regarding His essence, what He is and things like this can lead to kufr and shirk. Obviously, if someone interprets it, it's different. Like for example, the other day, there was a hadith a couple of days ago, someone mentioned, it was a hadith translated, but it was mistranslated, and they said, I think they attributed it to the Prophet ﷺ, when he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came to me in a dream and He was in the form of a man, a beardless man. And in the hadith it just said فَأَحْسَنُ surah. He came in a really good sort of way. But when the people translated it, they added this extra thing from their own sort of knowledge based on certain things, because there are groups, classically Mujassima, who attributed certain body parts to Allah, because in the Quran Allah says in several places, Yadullahi fawqa aydihim, Allah's hands is over their hands. Kullu shay'in halikun illa wajha, that everything shall perish except for His face. In the hadith is mentioned that when you walk to Allah, Allah will run towards you. So, and regarding seeing Allah on the Day of Judgment, can people see? Light travels in directions, so can you see without a direction? So these are obviously statements in the Quran. The scholars have discussed, there's different approaches to it. The safest approach would be one that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal is attributed to him, but even people who followed him, they went off the path and they interpreted it in other ways. But the group of Hanbalis, they were known as Fudala Hanabila, they took the true path of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and he said, whenever I come across a verse like this or a hadith like this, نَمُرُّ بِهِ وَنَسْكُتُ عَلَيْهِ, that we pass by this hadith and we affirm that it's correct, but the howness we don't know. And there's a famous attribution to Imam Malik rahimahullah that about the word in the Quran istawa, ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى إِلَى الْأَرْشِ ثُمَّ اسْتَوَى عَلَى الْأَرْشِ, that then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did istiwa upon the throne. Some people say that it means jalasa ala al-arsh, that he sat upon the throne. So what is the throne a physical thing, or is it a metaphoric thing? Is it something that alludes to his majesty and his grandeur, or is it a physical thing? Obviously there was people who interpreted it different.
Because there is a dua about, in the morning we do this dua.
Yeah.
Subhanallah wa bihamdihi wa rida
nafsihi wa midada kalimatihi.
So there is a weight. So it's a physical.
So there is a weight. I mean, this is the thing. All these, when you read it literally, you can't take it literally. You can't. The first thing you would think is you would take it literally, but then, if you do take it literally, you're attributing things to Allah that are not sort of attributed to Him. So this is why there is a whole science of Islam just dedicated to studying these, and this is the science of Aqidah, right? Whether on Kalam, because in the beginning of Islam, so when the Sahaba used to sort of talk to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ about certain things, they would discuss with the Prophet ﷺ, and he would tell them the rulings of what they have to live by. He would tell them about Allah. He would tell them about Iman. Even the famous hadith of Sahih Muslim, where the angel Jibreel came to the Prophet ﷺ, right, in his gathering, and no one had seen him before. So this man, he came to the Prophet ﷺ's gathering. No one had seen him before. He had stark white clothing. He had black hair. His pupils were really black. His what's the bit around the pupils? The white bit?
Cornea?
No, it's not the cornea. Astaghfirullah, anatomy.
Isn't it cornea?
The white bit, I forgot what it's called. No, the cornea is the thing
behind the eyes.
Oh yeah.
It's just the white part, the sclera, is it?
Sclera,
yeah. Of the eye, right? That's why we namurru bihi wa nansi. Yeah.
Oh.
So we should know, but we don't know. So so he came and he had no signs of travel. No one knew him from Medina, right? And no one knew that someone new came, because because it was a small community, when someone came from outside, you'll notice that someone here. And if they came from far, then they would have signs on their clothing and signs on their appearance that they came from a journey. But he didn't have any signs of a journey. And he comes and he asks the Prophet ﷺ certain things. He goes, Ya Muhammad. First he comes and he goes, Ya Muhammad. And you have to understand that the companions would never address the Prophet ﷺ by his name. They said, Ya Rasulullah, or Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this man, he came, Ya Muhammad. He said, Ya Muhammad. And they were astonished that he is asking you questions. So the full hadith is quite a long hadith. He asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam questions, and then he answered it himself. Right? So he came to teach the companions about the religion, right? Certain about Iman, what is Iman. The Prophet ﷺ answered the questions except for one of the question, which was regarding the signs of the Day of Judgment, and then he answered. He said, "Al-mas'ulu anha a'lam min as-sa'il," right? And then he answered that question. But the whole point of me mentioning was Jibreel came down and he spoke about Iman and things like that. Like Iman, he spoke about Ihsan, which is good character. What does that entail? That أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه, that you worship Allah as if you can see Him. فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. And if you can't worship Allah to that degree where you think that you're seeing Him, then worship Allah as if He is seeing you. This is the second stage of Ihsan. So he talked about these things, Iman and Ihsan, but they never really asked more questions because it was in their language to understand what Iman was. It was like he spoke to them in their language. But as Islam started to spread, Islam spread to the four corners of the world very fast, right? At one point, Islam was 30 miles from Paris within 100 years of the Prophet ﷺ's death. Can you imagine that? It spread all the way to the Iberian Peninsula into Europe.
So obviously at that time in the world, people were getting advanced in logic and rhetoric and things like that. So these people were accepting Islam. These people were accepting Islam with their studies that they've already studied before. So they were applying their understandings into Islam. So they were asked questions that haven't been asked before. For example, where is Allah? That wasn't really asked by the companions in the absolute sense. I mean, there's a hadith where the slave girl asks, where is Allah? And then she pointed up. This hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, we'll discuss it another time. But there's instances like that, but they wouldn't ask those philosophical questions that were influenced by them understanding Greek logic. So new questions started to arise. So at that time, people needed answers because people were adding all sorts of things from their own prior knowledge and superimposing that onto Islam. So this was the reason why the scholars had to sort of come about. They had to sort of come about because heresy was spreading at the time. Heretics were spreading, different people who were of different thoughts. So at that time, the Qadariyya arose, right? People who denied Qadar. It's ironic because they denied Qadar, but they were called the Qadariyya. And this is a linguistic device used in Arabic that you name someone with what they deny. So they were called the Qadariyya, they denied the Qadar, right? This arose not at the time, not 100, 200 years after, arose at the time of the Sahaba because Islam was growing exponentially at the time. So the Qadariyya arose, the people who, the Jabariyya arose, people who said that in insan majboor, that the human beings are sort of coerced into doing things, that you've only got one path, you've got no free will. Those sort of people arose. People arose, actually they're the same thing, Qadariyya. And then you had people who sort of objected to the you had the Mu'tazila come about, and they objected to things that were against logic, right? Things that they were against logic, and they took a more logical approach to Islam. Like they were saying certain things, they would reject certain hadith based on logic, and they had certain opinions that came about. And they say some famous early scholars like Imam as-Zamakhshari, who was a famous scholar in tafsir, he was attributed to the Mu'tazili school of thought. But anyway, certain scholars came about, right, of this sort of different framework. So everyone was thinking their own thing. So there was a need for scholars to arise to combat this. And this was the time when Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, he was alive. And then I was meant to talk about this next week, of the point of Sahih al-Bukhari, going through how the work is written, things like that. But one thing I will mention is the whole point of Imam Bukhari compiling Sahih al-Bukhari wasn't to just compile Sahih Hadith just so for the sake of it. These Hadith for the sake of it. Because these Hadith were already compiled from the books of his teachers, they were already compiled. But the point of him collecting these Hadith and repeating these Hadith, because he mentioned Hadith more than once, is to derive points from them and to tackle the bad Aqidah his time. Right? So the people who are saying certain things regarding the attributes of Allah, some people denied the attributes of Allah. The Mu'tazilis, people, they denied the attributes of Allah. Allah doesn't have this attribute because it doesn't make sense. Right? Allah doesn't have a face. Some people did ta'til, they went the complete opposite way. Some people went one way saying, yeah, this is Allah's face, he has a face like us. Some people went on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, and they were like, no, he doesn't have it, because how can he? If he's not like us. Because in the Quran there's a famous verse, Laysa kamithlihi shay, that nothing is like unto him. Yeah? So if everything is like, if he is not like anything else, then how could it be the case that he has a face and he has hands? So I keep on jumping from topic to topic, but the scholars who took one approach was that they did tafweed, which is they agree with what's meant by hand and face and Allah running towards the individual who walks towards him, right? They agree with that, but they say the meaning of this we relegate it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever Allah means by this is what it means. I'm not going to delve into its meaning. Imam Malik says about the word istawa, which can be translated into several things. People do a lot of ta'wil regarding this. He says istawa ma'lumun, that the word, the istiwa, the word is actually understood. Wa kayfiyatuhu majhulun, but the howness of it is not understood. It's majhul. We can't understand the howness of it. وَالسُّؤَالُ عَنْهَا بِدْعَةٌ. And keep on asking questions about it is a form of innovation. Because remember, the Sahaba didn't really ask them. It was after that. But there was a need to, and I think it was a really important time. Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts people at every single time to tackle the challenges of their time. So people like Imam Bukhari, Imam Tahawi, the scholars of Aqidah, they compiled their works to combat the challenges of their time. Going back to the statement, إِذَا صَحَّ الْحَدِيث فَهُوَ مَذْهَبِي. If a hadith is found to be authentic, then this is my madhab. So Imam Malik had this notion of, what was his notion?
That if the Sahabas are following, majority in the city of Medina is following.
Yeah. So the practice of the people of Medina, he would prefer it over an authentic hadith. And the reasons were, the Sahabi, what could it be that the narrator?
The context in which the hadith came.
Because the narrator doesn't act upon his hadith. That's one of the ways of telling. And the reasons for this could be that it's abrogated, the ruling changed. Or another reason could be?
The context. Right?
Context, specific versus general, right? So and then there's famous examples of these. For example, in the Muwatta, there's hadith about the Prophet ﷺ fasting on Fridays. Right? So fasting on a Friday is a sunnah, but the Prophet ﷺ, it reached Imam Malik, and he says that this hadith reached me with an authentic chain, but I didn't find the people of Medina practicing this, that they used to fast on Friday, so I don't do it. So certain things like this, he's mentioned himself, right? Is
it allowed, or because I don't?
No, it's allowed. It's allowed to fast on any day, but just keeping that day, Friday, isolated. If it's your practice you fast one day a week, it's fine too.
Like if it is one of the white days.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. That's fine. That's of course
or
fine.
You can fast alternate days.
Yeah. So if it's the Som Dawoodi, which is fasting on alternate days, then it's fine. If it's Ayyamul Bid, the white days, then it's fine. So the 14th, 15th, the 16th day of every month, the Prophet ﷺ would fast, and the Som of Dawood, which is one of the fasts that the Prophet ﷺ said you could do, then you can do this. But in terms of in general, he wouldn't keep that as a sunnah.
Just pick that day and then fast.
Yeah, just pick that day. Because Monday and the Thursday were the sunnah days, yeah? We mentioned in Sahih Muslim and others. But, so that he considered, he weighed it up. So he had the authentic narration, Amal of Ahlul Medina. He preferred the Amal of Ahlul Medina. So this was Imam Malik's thing. Imam Shafi'i
was a disciple of Imam.
Yeah, Imam Shafi'i is a disciple of Imam Malik, and this is a conversation that's happening between Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i. So Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik, right? They're in this sort of discussion. So this is Imam Malik's methodology, but Imam Shafi'i, he disagrees with this methodology. He would rather put weight on the text of the hadith over the practice of Medina. So his thing is that if the hadith is found to be authentic, then that is my madhab. So now you can understand the context of where it's coming from. Yeah, so he would prefer this hadith over the amal of Ahlul Medina, and that was his methodology, right? So it's a different methodology to him. And then this statement, when it's attributed to scholars like Imam Abu Hanifa, in those contexts, Imam Abu Hanifa was speaking to his students and they would discuss one single mas'ala for 40 days on end. Just one single mas'ala, they would debate and deliberate. Some of it, because the way his methodology was, he was formed on shura. So he would discuss issues with his students days upon days. And some of his students were experts on hadith. Some of them were experts on language. Some of them were experts in finance and different fields of expertise they had. And they would discuss and deliberate. And sometimes it would be that Imam Hanifa would take his opinion back. He would do ruju. So he would say, no, I was of this opinion before, but my student came and brought these narrations, etc. But now I take my saying back, right? Some, like in the modern Hanafi school, they prefer the opinions of his students sometimes more than the teacher, Imam Abu Hanifa. And they say that the students of Imam Abu Hanifa disagreed with him in 2/3 of his madhab. It's a famous saying, that they disagreed with Imam Abu Hanifa in 2/3 of his madhab. So they would discuss and deliberate, and they would come to conclusions.
So what would Imam Shafi's opinion about the kissing?
Okay, so Imam Shafi'i, he would break the fast according to Imam Shafi'i's hadith. According to Imam Shafi'i, but then according to the Hanafi school, it wouldn't, unless obviously it led to other things. But generally, they took other hadith as well. They didn't just take this particular hadith. They took this hadith was in Abu Dawud. There's other hadith, it's mentioned in the Muwatta Imam Malik, Muwatta Imam Muhammad, in other books as well, Al-Qubla, Lissa'im. But going back to what I was saying, the Amal of Ahlul Medina. So Imam Hanifa, when he was saying it, he was talking to his students saying that if this hadith didn't reach me, right, and it was authentic, then that would be my madhab. But obviously if this hadith had already reached him and he thought it was authentic and he didn't find out if it was a specific general, if it was mansukh, abrogated, and there's other things as well, but I'm just mentioning two examples which are easy to understand, then obviously he would act upon the hadith. But it doesn't mean that every hadith which every scholar says to be sahih. For example, even in Sahih al-Bukhari, there's so many hadith where Imam Bukhari will mention this hadith, I think 158 times. He alludes to Hanafi school, saying that the Hanafi school here, they're going against the hadith. He'll say, وَقَالَ بَعْضُ النَّاسِ, some of the people say, and he'll say, this is their opinion, but the hadith is saying this, especially in one of the chapters of Bukhari, which is Kitabul Hiyal, the book of legal puzzles or ways out. He said the Hanafis go against the hadith here. 158 times he mentions وَقَالَ بَعْضُ النَّاسِ. And people say, why does he say, some people say, why didn't he just say Hanafis say? Do you guys have any idea why?
He's not one of
No.
Khayba?
It's because he used to live in Bukhara. Bukhara was full of Hanafis. So obviously he would get, one of those things. So obviously where he would go, you have to, diplomatic, they teach you diplomacy in it. So everything, the hadith scholars are on the ball. So Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, so he mentioned certain places where he said the hadith is sahih, but the Hanafis go against it. But the Hanafis would reply to that saying that the hadith reached Imam Abu Hanifa with an authentic chain, but even regardless, he didn't sort of act upon it because of other reasons. So there'll always be reasons why. It's not just, I reject the hadith. That's why they say reject is a very loaded word. You don't reject the hadith. You find other hadith or Quranic principles which overrule that. And in the Hanafi's methodology, the Quranic principle overrules the khabar ahad, the solitary narration that we had. So this is the Hanafi sort of methodology. We're going to talk about methodologies soon anyway. Do you know what time it is?
Yeah, it's 8:58.
8:50. Okay, we'll conclude it inshallah. We talked about other things. I'm going to talk about the life of Imam Bukhari. But I'll just mention the last few points. هذا حديث صحيح هذا حديث غير صحيح. So when people say this is a sahih hadith, this is not a sahih hadith, they mean that if these 5 criteria fulfills them, and if it doesn't fulfill these 5 criteria, then it's not an authentic hadith, but that doesn't mean that it's not accepted. It could be in the next level, which is the Hasan hadith. So again, which is the most authentic sanad? Different scholars will have different opinions. Some scholars say Zuhri and Salim and Abihi from his father, and this is attributed to Imam Ishaq ibn Rahway and Imam Ahmad. Some scholars say that it's Ibn Sirin and Ubaidah and Ali. This is attributed to Ali ibn al-Madini and Fallas. Some scholars say it's Al-A'mash and Ibrahim and Alqama and Abdullah, and this is attributed to Ibn Ma'in. And then I was going to go on to who was the first one to pen down a book which is exclusively for authentic hadith, and this is Sahih al-Bukhari. But it's really important to know the reasons why Sahih al-Bukhari was compiled. In Sahih al-Bukhari, what's the organization, what's the structure there? Because in Bukhari, some people say it's the most authentic book, which is true in a sense, but sometimes it has Imam Bukhari's opinions inside, and sometimes his opinion goes against everyone else. For example, I mentioned one of his opinion when you were there in the first week, and you remember, about the Tahrif al-Quran, about the Quran being changed.
Okay.
Can you remember this one?
Not really. But I recall.
Yeah. So in Bukhari, right in the end, Kitab al-Tawheed, right at the last bit of Bukhari, he's actually doing rad on a group called the Jahmiyyah. So Kitab al-Rad al-Jahmiyyah, and that's what the title of the book is: the refutation of the group called the Jahmiyyah. So everything that the Jahmis say, he's sort of replying with that in terms of hadith. So they denied certain things, like they said about the hellfire, it will come to an end. The paradise will come to an end and everyone will just cease to exist. So obviously this is not the opinion of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the majority. So Imam Bukhari tackles that. So towards the end of Bukhari, he mentioned about these narrations about the Quran being muharraf. So the groups who came before, the Christians and the Jews, they changed the Quran. Sorry, not the Quran, the books. So the Injil, which is the Bible, and the Torah. So Imam Bukhari is of the opinion that وَلَيْسَ لِأَحَدٍ أَن يُغَيِّرَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ, that it's not befitting for anyone. No one has the capacity to actually change the words of Allah, but they change the interpretation. So according to him, the words in the books are still there as it was revealed by Allah, but it's just they change in the interpretation. But the majority of the people of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the majority of the scholars of Islam, Jamhur, they say that what's meant by yuharrifun al-kalima an mawadi'i, that they changed the words from its places. It means that there was a physical changing of the actual words. And the difference between their nations is that bimastuhfidhu, they were given the task to protect the book, but Allah took it upon himself to protect the transmission of the Quran. Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. This is a promise made by Allah. But in the previous scripture, it was the task of the people to preserve it. So this was sort of the difference. And then it leads on to which was the first book or first work which was exclusively for Sahih Hadith. I think next time what we'll start with is the life of Imam Bukhari, and then again going through what's meant by what are the contents of his book. I even bought here, this is Muqaddimah Fathul Bari. So this was one of the famous commentaries of Bukhari, written by a scholar called Al-Hafiz Ahmed ibn Ali ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and it's a book called Fathul Bari. It's the most famous commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari, and in the Muqaddimah he's got a really good section on the life of Imam Bukhari, but inshallah we'll do that next time. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, wa nashhadu an la ilaha illallah, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.